Hi, so it's Kelly Robin, co-founder, CEO of Fisher Wallace. I wanted to just quickly run through, how we interact with the FDA, our history with the FDA, and where we're at in our process right now. We're going through an FDA clearance process for the treatment of anxiety for our new wearable technology, which we're calling OAK. It also has a technical name called the FW200. So you may hear that mentioned in some other videos. We have a long history working with the FDA, and overall it's been a very positive relationship. So when I first started in 2009 with my co-founder Chip, neither of us had any experience in medical devices, working with the FDA. I mean, we were brand new to this whole thing, and we spent certainly the first couple of years just getting our sea legs with manufacturing, and so in 2011 we had a real teaching moment occurred where the FDA, and for us it seemed like it was out of the blue. In reality, this had been building up for years, but the FDA called for much more strict regulation of our device category. The device category is called cranial electrotherapy stimulation. And we were the only true brain stimulation device in this category. All the other devices, and there were 10 or 11, I believe, maybe 13 in total. All the other devices that were being regulated under this category were, vagal nerve stim, electrodes on the ears, or, just not actually putting electrodes here. And even today, we don't see any devices in the category that put the electrodes here. Anyway, in 2011, they called for very strict regulation of this. And they wanted to make everything called Class 3, which is the very highest level of kind of the highest bar to pass for a medical device. And it's typically reserved for implanted devices, a heart valve, things that are risky to give to the patient, require surgery, etc. And the reason they did that is because they didn't really feel like there was any, highly credible scientific evidence on the safety and effectiveness of these devices at that time. And so to be safe, they wanted to have this in Class 3. We then, hired a fantastic consultant named Phil Phillips, who was at FDA for more than 20 years in the device department. We learned the ins and outs of how this regulation works, and actually the history of how the FDA got to this point, et cetera. And we ended up submitting what's called a reclassification petition, basically asking for a panel meeting with the FDA for us to present our case, almost like a court hearing, for why we thought the device should be in Class 2, which is a lower risk category. And we hired a very well-known biostatistician named Richard Caccarini, who was actually the head of statistics at FDA for a number of years. Also, it was now a consultant, to go through all of the related research in this category, going back really decades. And we used that to present a case that actually, even though there weren't large studies for any particular device, we basically educated the FDA on the breadth of this. And for the FDA, I mean, it's not like the entire agency is dedicated to understanding our category. And I think it was an esoteric kind of, a category that wasn't, people didn't know a lot about. So it required some education. That was the beginning of a multi-year process, which actually didn't conclude until 2019. So for 8 years, we went back and forth with the agency about this subject. And I won't get into all the details of the iterations of that process, but it took that long. And now the benefit to us was that it allowed us to not only have a shot at changing how this regulation would be finalized, but it allowed us to market our device throughout that process. So if we had done nothing in 2011 and 12 after this announcement occurred, then the category would have required class 3 for anxiety, for depression and insomnia. And just to give you an idea of that, it's a $400,000 application fee just for a class 3 submission. That's just the fee to apply. And you need to have very robust scientific evidence, which, it's millions of dollars of evidence. So that would have put an end to the category as we know it. And there just were no companies in the space that could afford to do that. And we thought we had a very solid case of why it's safe. So, at the end of the day, we convinced the FDA to put anxiety and insomnia into class 2. They still require clinical data, not at the same threshold as class 3. And that's a much more appropriate category for this. And part of the calculus there is, anxiety and insomnia, they're very prevalent, but they're not life-threatening in the same way that depression can be. Obviously, the worst outcome in depression is suicide. And so, and also to treat depression, or rather to demonstrate effectiveness in treating depression, the bar as a result of that is higher for effectiveness, because the rationale is, if the FDA were to allow devices into the market that actually weren't effective, then you would get people who really needed intervention getting something that wouldn't work, and thus the patient can become at risk. And but getting class 2 for anxiety and insomnia was a huge win. And it's a little known fact that Fisher Wallace is primarily responsible for making that happen. There was one other company with the ear clip electrodes that joined our reclassification petition, but didn't make the same level of argument with these FDA biostatistician and so forth. And we had former general in the U.S. Army arrive to the panel and talk about how important this kind of solution can be for veterans and so forth. So we made a very convincing case. But the most important thing is we showed it was safe over time, and that has played out, right? We've run 1,500 subjects now through clinical trials and real world studies. No reports of serious side effects. There are some reports of serious side effects, to be transparent, out there that around we have 60,000 people now using our version 1 device, but none of those reports have been found to actually be credibly linked to device usage. One example of those reports was someone reporting getting dementia from one use of the device, and it's just physiologically impossible. Dementia is something that takes years to manifest, and so just to be transparent, I'm not saying there have never been serious side effect reports, but in a clinical trial in which when someone reports something, it's followed up on and assessed, there have been no reports of serious side effects. So we still have to get through that depression class 3. And that's why the research we did that we published in 2024 is so important, because it showed effectiveness versus placebo when you combined men and women who were usage compliant, who actually followed instructions. And when you looked at just the entire group of women who were in that study, 185 women, we beat placebo with compared to SSRIs by about twice the delta that you would see with SSRIs. And so, I just wanted to give you some context on how long this process has taken to actually get to where we are. And, that is also why we had to stop selling version 1, because we needed to meet these new requirements and with our version 2 device. And the FDA was actually very kind in kind of grandfathering us into this new, in a way, it's not technically grandfathered, but they did give us, basically 3 years of runway after that order in 2019 that changed the regulation. They allowed us to continue to market version 1 for 3 years. And then, finally we did have to stop and just focus on version 2 and get version 2 through the process. And so over that period of time, we had the fundraise, we did trials during COVID, which were extremely difficult and ultimately not data that we could use for an FDA submission, although it was very valuable internally. But we had a lot of dropout. I mean, we were literally running it in the middle of fall of 2020, and people were getting, suddenly their kids were locked. I mean, they're all locked down. It was just a very difficult time to run trials. But we did get some, especially in insomnia, we got some great data out of that. That was useful for us to validate doing a big study. And so, after those COVID trials, we did 2 more studies, the anxiety trial with 165 first responders that we're now using as the basis for our new FDA clearance. And we did that depression study I mentioned, which on its own, I would say is, we believe, and our consultants believe, that it's likely we can get through the FDA process for depression with that. And that's what we're going to focus on after this anxiety one. It's an expensive process to go through that, as I mentioned. So we couldn't really do that in parallel. We've raised enough money to at least do the one path at first, and we'll do the second one afterwards. And so, I think I'll just end here with saying we're very excited about where the neurological division is now in the FDA in terms of their, general embrace of this kind of technology has, they have embraced it more. I think they started from a very cynical, and which is healthy. They're the FDA. They got to be really questioning of credibility. That's their job. But now that the years have passed since 2011, there's been quite a bit of research, including a lot that we've produced, and a greater understanding that our device is not just sending electricity kind of over the skull and, making it feel like there's stimulation, but not really doing anything. We've now shown at Harvard, with Harvard researchers at Harvard Medical School, that our stimulation is in fact engaging these center brain structures with clinically significant electrical field. So now there's an appreciation of the fact that this device really is able to engage these brain structures. And then we have the clinical data that shows the result of that. So in short, I think we're in a very good spot in terms of, our relationship with the agency, their openness to this kind of technology. They've had some leadership changes at the end of the year, which I think are very positive for our field. And so, we're literally, I would say, a week, 2 weeks away from finishing our application. I actually have here, we have our statistical analysis report of our first responder study that we're submitting. That's now finished. That took months of work. So anyway, we're expecting, can't guarantee, but we're expecting FDA clearance. I'm expecting it around June, possibly earlier, possibly a little later. It's not 100% guaranteed, of course, but with the results of this study, which are very strong, and the fact that the FDA is already very familiar with our technology in general, the version 1 device has a lot of similarities. It's different in some important ways. Version 1 is a variable output device. Version 2 is a fixed output device in which we validated a specific dose. And that's how we were able to, file a new patent. Anyway, the FDA is familiar with the technology, familiar now with the safety record. And so when they're making a risk benefit analysis, at least we have the risk is now they know is low. And so you have to show benefit is greater than that. And we have exceptional amount of evidence of that. So we're very, very confident in getting through this process and getting through it quickly. The FDA has, really focused on, making this process faster, and all their review processes faster. And we've seen the results of that in our interactions with them. They've been very engaged, and I'm expecting this to go quickly, and we'll keep you updated. So that's our FDA story. Thanks for listening.